A few years ago on New Year's Eve, I headbutted a man on the subway. Here's a story I generally told people. My wife and I were coming home from skating. We were on an eastbound train, and there was a guy, a big, loud, obnoxious, aggressive guy. He was making the scene. He was opening the door of the subway, sticking his head out, and making people feel nervous. So the long and short of it is, I got up, told him to sit down, and after he threatened my wife, I smashed his nose with my forehead. The police came, he was arrested, and I was kind of the quote-unquote good guy in that situation. But the real story behind that fight is more complicated. My name's Daemon Fairless, and I'm the author of Mad Blood Stirring, The Inner Lives of Violent Men. It's a nonfiction book about, well, the inner lives of violent men. Guys like the guy on the subway, MMA fighters, rapists, serial killers, guys who go to war, and also myself and my own propensity to get into these kind of situations. Before I started writing the book, I'd tell that story that way, the fight on the subway, because I kind of saw myself as the guy in the white hat. I'm really not the kind of guy who gets in fights very often. I mean, I've been in maybe a dozen or so in my life, if that. So when I think about that story now, I tell it a lot differently. The fact is I was in a bad mood before I got on the subway. I was tired. There was a huge crowd, and I hate crowds. My skates were banging against my shins. I was just grumpy. My wife and I were sitting there, and behind us there was this loud, obnoxious guy swearing away, and it just, put me on edge. So that continued for a while. The subway got quieter and quieter, and I started to get more and more nervous and angry. And so I started to kind of think about wanting to talk to him. Eventually he was getting so, silly and obnoxious that he was prying open the doors as the subway was going and sticking his head out of them, and these concrete pillars were whooshing by. I got up and walked over to him and told him to sit the fuck down. And he kind of looked at me like, "Who are you?" And I think I said, "I'm the guy who's gonna make you sit down." I said that action hero line. And he, of course, exploded, got in my face, "You want to go?" The fact is, I did, but I kind of realized that I did, and I realized that I didn't want to be in this situation. But then he followed me, and he was taunting me. He spat on me. He threw his Gatorade with, vodka, I think, in it, at me. Eventually, a subway employee came on and kind of pulled him off out onto the platform. And he started banging on the windows where I was, and I kind of reflexively got up because I wanted to fight him. Then he got back on the train and came right to where I was. And the whole time building up in me was this kind of icy rage. I kind of stopped thinking of him as human and started thinking of him as an object to punch. I felt I had the right to do that. I felt he was a bad guy and I was the good guy. He was looming over us, and he said something about my wife. I can't remember exactly what it was. It was threatening. He called her a bitch, I think. And so I stood up and I told him, you're talking. Either you start swinging or get off. I didn't say it that nicely. And he wouldn't get out of my face. I mean, we were this close to each other. That icy rage came back, and I just cocked my head back and brought it down on his face. And then things were a blur. I was trying to punch him, but I couldn't. It was the weirdest thing until I realized people were holding me back. He punched me in the face, and then we tumbled over seats, and he was on me, and I was gouging his eye, and we were pulled apart again. And eventually the cops came, and they arrested him, and I think they understood he was drunk, and he had been the belligerent on the train. He was the bad guy. I was the good guy. But the fact is, I was really the guy escalating a situation that was already volatile. So that line between good guy and bad guy isn't as clear. I didn't see that then.